On February 21st, 1986, a game designer by the name of Miyamoto was walking around the countryside of his home. He discovered a cave and explored the depths of it. This cave would come to serve as his inspiration for the creation of his first game, The Legend of Zelda. The original story is about three significant figures. The player controls the green tunic-donned hero by the name of Link, whose objective is to collect 8 different pieces of the legendary Triforce, in order to use it to rescue the Kingdom of Hyrule's princess and the goddess Hylia's reincarnation, Zelda, from the antagonist, the Demon King Ganondorf. The simple story was the leading factor in the currently 29-game series becoming world-renowned, being the inspiration for numerous games such as Genshin Impact, Dark Souls, and many more. The classic 8-bit style published initially on Nintendo's NES has evolved heavily over the past 37 years, from introducing its first 3-dimensional game on Nintendo's second hit console, the Nintendo 64, which introduced the ability to upgrade games from the 18 to 16-bit style to a whopping 64 bits, allowing for the 3-dimensional capabilities that were used in arguably one of the greatest video games ever created, Ocarina of Time, which received a 98% reception rating from the public along its release in 1998. Ocarina of Time's creation revolutionized the creation of video games, introducing some extraordinary capabilities such as new gameplay mechanics, deeper storytelling, and even more dungeons. In the original Zelda game, one could expect to finish the game in about 8 to 10 hours, versus the 26 to 37 hours it took to complete Ocarina of Time. The introduction of the 5th installment of the series heavily deepened the overall story and inspired many future installments of the game series. The story introduces a time travel mechanic with a playable ocarina used to stop the Demon King Ganondorf from stealing the other scattered pieces of the Triforce, which have been separated into 3 pieces: the Triforce of Courage given to Link, Wisdom to Zelda, and Power to Ganondorf. If Ganondorf were to obtain all 3, he could, and would, rule the world. Link must locate and obtain 3 spiritual stones that would open the Temple of Time, which houses the legendary sword that seals the darkness, that of which introduces 7 sages which will help him in his journey. Later on, only 2 years following the release of Ocarina of Time, is its sequel, Majora's Mask. The pressurized release follows much of the same mechanics as the former, even stealing a lot of its story aspects. Except the story takes a different approach, in which Link finds himself in a parallel world to Hyrule, except he must continuously travel through time once again using his ocarina over the course of 3 days in order to use numerous masks to free giants, that of who will eventually stop the moon from colliding into Termia and destroying it in an instant. There began to appear many other sequels and spin-offs, all falling into a split timeline following the release of Ocarina of Time. Notably, Majora's Mask fell into the eventual first timeline, that of which was dubbed the Child Timeline. This timeline followed the past occurrences of Ocarina of Time, that of which Link stayed as a child at the end of the game. The game following Majora's Mask is called Twilight Princess. The game developed even more lore, specifically into the Kingdom of Twilight and its inhabitants. In the game, there is notably a character that closely resembles Link's past final form in Majora's Mask. The game is considered to be the quote darkest the franchise has produced, being released back in November of 2006. The atmosphere and art of the game was deemed quite scary, and the game began to be directed more at a teen audience rather than towards children. The second timeline, the quote adult timeline, is that of which takes place had Link decided to stay as an adult following Ocarina of Time. Next on the timeline follows Wind Waker. The story takes place on the ocean that is now Hyrule, which became flooded by the goddesses after the fires that took place during Ganondorf's tyranny in Ocarina of Time. Link lives on an island called Outset Island. Early game, his younger sister is kidnapped. With the help of the pirate captain Tetra, they work together to obtain Ocarina of Time Link's power, the Master Sword, as they collect a number of pearls across the ocean. This leads them to obtaining the sword. During the confrontation with Ganondorf, they fail, and the Master Sword loses its power. It is also revealed that the pirate captain Tetra is actually Princess Zelda in disguise. Together they work to restore the Master Sword's power and retrieve the 8 fragments of the Triforce of Courage. In their second and final confrontation with Ganondorf, Ganondorf steals their 2 pieces of the Triforce. Before his wish of ruling the world could come to effect, The two fight him using the Master Sword, turning him to stone. Later on, 2 sequels to Wind Waker came about called Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, in which the plot focuses on the newly discovered continent of Hyrule, continuing to fight various enemies along the way. Wind Waker was released in December 2002, and Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks followed in 2007. Notably, the third and final timeline came to be known as the Fallen Hero Timeline, in which some way, at the end of Ocarina of Time, Link dies in battle and fails to stop Ganondorf from attaining his and Zelda's pieces of the Triforce. This timeline contains many different games, including Four Swords, a multiplayer-specific game released back in March of 2004, Four Swords Adventure, a sequel to the original Four Swords, A Link to the Past, in which the same main story is followed but originally introduces the concept of the Master Sword, which makes sense as it was released in November 1991 and was the third official installment to the game series. Oracle of Seasons and Ages are 2 separate games that of which oppositely reflect each other in terms of gameplay style. Oracle focuses on action and Seasons on puzzles. These games introduce the concept of the 3 goddesses of Hylia, which are said to have created Hyrule itself, each representing their own section of the Triforce, that of which they created. Din, the goddess of power, who is introduced in Oracle of Seasons, and Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, is introduced in Oracle of Ages. The third goddess, Farore, the goddess of courage, is not introduced at all in these games, but it is deemed as fitting since the gamer plays as Link, the holder of her piece of the Triforce. Both games were released in 2001. Link's Awakening is one of the rare games that of which simply does not follow the original plot, not including the Triforce or Zelda at all. Link's objective in this game is to return to Hyrule after waking up on a mysterious island. It was released in June of 1993. A Link Between Worlds was a game that heavily resembled A Link to the Past in many ways mechanically. Plot-wise, it focused on a parallel world to Hyrule, Lorule, and Link must fight and defeat many characters that are polar opposites to the ones in Hyrule. The game was released in November of 2013. Triforce Heroes was a game heavily similar to Four Swords and features once again a multiplayer mechanic. It was released in October of 2015. The last addition to this timeline were the original 2 games, Legend of Zelda and Legend of Zelda 2. Another game, called Skyward Sword, has been deemed one of the most important story-wise to the series. The game itself is the official first in the order of events that took place throughout the series. The game tells the story of how the 3 goddesses, Din, Nehru, and Farore, bestowed the Triforce upon Hyrule. The Demon King Demise, a deity who had supposedly conquered time itself, laid waste to much of the land seeking to take the Triforce. The goddess Hylia gathered the survivors and sent them into the sky, allowing her to fight Demise. She was victorious, but the land was severely damaged. Uncounted years later, the land is known as Skylock, and its people believe the surface below is a myth. When Link's childhood friend Zelda falls off her pet Loftwing down to the surface below the clouds and is captured, Link is conflicted, unable to do anything. That is, until the spirit of the Master Sword, Fi, leads Link one night into the statue of Hylia on the island, there of which he obtains the Master Sword. He is then able to travel below the clouds, and while on the surface he must progress across the land to find and obtain 3 songs, that of which each belong to the 3 goddesses, which combined bring the Master Sword to its complete power. After powering the Master Sword, Link uses it to fight Demise in a heated battle, that of which ends with Demise being sealed, but not before him announcing a curse, that of which he curses Link and Zelda's bloodlines to receive his reincarnated rage for all eternity. His rage would later take the form within Ganondorf in future games, and would possess him in order to fight Link and Zelda's respective reincarnations/bloodlines. This game overall set the why for what takes place in many of the games, and is essential for understanding their significance along each timeline. The game itself released in November of 2011. The most recent and notably impactful addition to the series was released on March 3, 2017, and is known as Breath of the Wild, that which follows the first timeline, the Child Timeline. Breath of the Wild's plot is rounded about the story of past heroes and their impact, notably of the hero from 1,000 years prior and the technological advancements the Sheikah had made. 4 giant creatures known as the Divine Beasts were used simultaneously to weaken the extremely powerful Calamity Ganon, who was finished off and sealed away by the previous Princess Zelda and her chosen hero Link. The story takes place 100 years after a previously devastating event in which Link had fallen, was placed into a healing chamber, and was unable to fight. Princess Zelda sealed Calamity Ganon all by herself, temporarily holding him for the time it took Link to awaken once more. The events Link must achieve in this game include freeing his deceased friend's spirits, the pilots of the Divine Beasts that also fell to Ganon in his malice power. After freeing the spirits, he is able to go to Hyrule Castle and fight Calamity Ganon with the help of Zelda once more. Though this game followed the story of its predecessors, its game style heavily differed and introduced an entirely new concept to the series. The game was completely open world, allowing thousands of options for the player. The game has by far been one of the most impactful in the series, allowing for many plot renditions, with a prequel called Age of Calamity being released in November of 2020. The game focusing on the before events that took 100 years prior to Breath of the Wild. There was an announcement in 2019, the sequel of Breath of the Wild, which was recently finally named Tears of the Kingdom, the set release date of Tears of the Kingdom being May 3rd, 2023. Overall, the release of the game did tremendously as the feature game released along the Nintendo Switch console's launch. In the first week of it being available, over 230,000 copies were purchased. Since then, over 29 million copies have been sold, making it the 24th most purchased game of all time. Since the series' initial release in 1986, 29 games have come into existence, with another well on its way. Many additional spin-offs have been created that I did not mention in this video, a solid 17 to be accurate, most notably out of the 17 being 2 Hyrule Warriors games, Cadence of Hyrule, numerous Tingle games, and 2 Twilight Princess based ones, all of which deserve somewhat of an honorable mention. The style of the franchise has evolved heavily over the years, transforming from an 8-bit masterpiece to a fully 3D open-world adventure, where you get to choose what you do. This masterpiece of a series started off with a man entering a simple cave, and it is yet to finish even 37 years later. There is much to come, and I am very excited to see what story lies ahead for us. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoy.